Welcome to WLNM, the web novel and manga review, hosted by Zeke Changuris.
Welcome to WLNM, the web light novel and manga review, the podcast dedicated to bringing our listeners the artists and writers that are part of this renaissance of creativity, giving us stories to entertain and inspire us. But we have something a little different for you today. We're going into the academic track. We've heard of girls like Modoka, Lyrica, Ilia, Sally, and Sakura. These are the young maidens that we've all grown to love as they battle the forces of evil while balancing their everyday school life and running with toast in their mouth. We are joined here by Nadana, who decided to take this academic step a little further and wrote a master's thesis based on the magical girls genre. And I'd like to welcome you today to the podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me.
So let's start off with the beginning. Why magical girls?
Oh God, that is a very funny story. Well, my journey with magical girls starts with many other fans of the genre, whereas it started back in the mid-90s, I want to say 1995 in the States. I came home from high school one day. I was in my sophomore year. I was starting a new school. It was a really crazy time. And then I went to the living room and I thought, I'm just going to zone out and watch TV before I do my homework, as many teenagers are pretty much doing at that point. I don't know if they're still doing it now.
No, oh yeah, they still do it. But they also are watching TV on their phones during class while they're doing their work. So they've just waited. They just skipped the part about going home first before they watch TV and do their work.
Exactly. And so this blonde-haired, blue-eyed, huge blue-eyed girl appears on my TV screen with her meatballs on her head. And I'm just like, oh my God, what is this? Like, it was such it sounds so like, are you kidding me? Like, you just saw a girl with big eyes and it's like, it changed your life, but literally changed my life. Because it was the first time I'd ever seen a series, or like, I don't want to, I know it's called anime, but at that time, like, before I knew it was anime, it was like a cartoon I'd never seen before. And it featured a teenage girl with superpowers kicking all sorts of butt, but also having to deal with her do her homework, or getting bad grades on a test, or having to deal with her parents or her bratty younger brother. And I'd never seen anything like that before. Like, you had the She-Ras, and you had Wonder Woman, and you had other, female sort of superheroes in Western animation, but you'd never seen anybody that was close to your age. And I was 15 at the time, the first time I ever saw the DIC dub of Sailor Moon. Obviously, I'm talking about Sailor Moon, and it was like, it was a game changer. It was a shift. Like, Power Rangers by then were very popular at that time. But to see it with an all-girl, color-coded superhero fighting team, it was something I'd never seen before. And I just remember running home every day and watching it and checking out the story and seeing that it was more than just fighting the bad guys. It was, girls being friendly and, fostering the bonds of friendship, and, the romance between Usagi and Mamoru, being forefront and center to the plot. There was a bit of an air of maturity to it that by then, like, the Monster of the Week shows, even with Power Rangers, I'd never seen before. And it stayed with me. And then one day it was all gone because it was canceled because it didn't get enough, ratings. And then it showed up again on Toonami in the States, I want to say like late 1999, early 2000, and then Mix, before it became Tokyo Pop, released the first version of the translated manga, and it was like Sailor Moon was just like pretty much a part of my life, the same way that other sort of cartoons such as like He-Man or She-Ra were at that time. So when I finally got around to going to university. By then I was a single mom and with my son, who was, I want to say 4 at the time. I decided in my final year I was going to do an honors thesis, because I really wanted to be an academic and I really wanted to do research. And by then I was already cemented as an anime fan, and I noticed that there wasn't a lot of anime centered research done by fans. Like, you have the academics that see it as, oh, this is something that's interesting that's happening in popular culture, I'm going to look at it. But you don't have the ones that have to eventually disclose that they are fans. So I really wanted to do that. And but it's magical girls. There isn't a lot of research at it at the time. I think it's very different now, but there wasn't a lot. And I was like, nobody's going to let me do this. Like, there's no possibility that anyone's going to let me do this. And surprise, surprise, somebody in the department agreed to be my supervisor. And he's like, oh no, I find this interesting. Like, I wanted to look at magical girls. I wanted to look at their narrative. I wanted to look at how they're different, how they're similar and different to usual sort of hero narratives. But I also wanted to see, to look at, how they sort of like turn it on its head, and like it, because it's different from like when it comes to Charles. Sorry, oh God, I can't. You said his name and now I've completely forgot about it. But like the monomyth and like the hero's journey, like
Joseph
it's
Campbell.
Joseph Campbell. There we go. I've had so many.
Charles Dunbar would be a different academic.
Exactly. Even though he and I have talked many hours about Joseph Campbell. But and then when I was also in a folklore and a contemporary culture, we talked a lot about Joseph Campbell. But I saw this and I'm like, this is a good sort of like starting point, but there are differences in terms of like how it applies when the hero is a heroine. And I wanted to really look at that. And I also wanted to look at why, well, not just, I know it's there are fans that of various identities, but I wanted to look at why they appealed so much to the young girls that they were written to, and in Japan and then eventually globally. So that's where I started, and I was able to do that for my final year in university. And I said, you know what, you can only do so much. I really would like to take this on with my master's, but it's tricky because, again, masters, if you can't find a supervisor that's not interested in your subject, you're not going to get accepted. Yeah. But I found somebody who was very much into it. My supervisor, Dr. Cody Colton, who is very much into Japanese theater, including Takarazuka Review, which is, you may know, but you may not know, it's the all-female theater review that's in Takarazuka, Japan. And he was very interested in my thesis subject, so he agreed to take me on, and the rest was history from there.
Hey, never be like, oh, this, worried about, a transforming moment, so to speak, when you had that first encounter. For me, it was 1983, seeing my first episode of Macross.
Oh,
blew my mind. People died.
Yes.
in the opening episode. I'm like, people are, like half the planet is being blown up and people are dying. I've never seen this in cartoons before. And so that cemented me. That got me, and it still has me today. So I get it. You can have that, oh my God moment when you're watching something and you're like, dude, this has changed my world, and I won't look at things the same way again. And yeah, it's for me, it's been a love since '83, and that leads me to interviewing as many people as I can about these genres. So you were talking about applying like the myth narrative that Joseph Campbell set up, and I know he's become more controversial in the modern era because his mythos structure focuses solely on the hero, and hero in the masculine sense, not in the non-gendered sense.
Right.
So what is the what is this, the arc that you've seen represented repeatedly, I guess? I mean, as they say, there's no new stories in Hollywood. So
Mhm.
I imagine a hero's story is, whether it's male or female, there's a lot of similarities.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because I had to address that in my thesis and I actually spent a good deal of my research finding articles addressing that because it is very masculine. Because if you think there's this talk about how the hero, is fighting and is bloodshed and is being very like aggressive toward their enemies while they are going for the spoils and ascending to godhood or apotheosis. Whereas it's a little bit different when it comes to um, female or heroine centered, because a the heroine may not necessarily even want to like it. Like there's this idea that the hero is going to be reluctant to do this journey, and if he doesn't do it, then it's automatically it ends. No, and more often than not, there's a reluctance to getting involved. It's like, oh, no, 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 no. Like you see it in Sailor Moon, you kind of see it in Cardcaptor Sakura, you kind of see it in Tokyo Mew Mew. Just basically this whole sort of, I don't want to, I hate to say it because it's as the series go on, obviously it's not true, but this sort of self-centered sort of thing, like, oh no, I don't want to be a hero, I just want to get new clothes, or I want a boyfriend, or I want, I want to get a good grade on a test, or you know
Well,
um
Usagi in general was very is very selfish, especially in the
yes,
early days.
yes.
Um, and for some people, that was a big turnoff because you're like,
Yeah.
stop whining.
Yeah, I mean, especially in the first episode, she literally weakens the first Yoma because she wouldn't stop crying. Which I always found to be hilarious, but so very true to her character. And but in terms of that, I think the main point, as I'm trying to think of my thesis right now, it's that there's definitely more of an effort for the heroine to be not only more concerned with herself, but to be more concerned with others that are sharing in her journey. And it's not just Sailor Moon, but there's just a lot more of an effort to be more protective of the people who have agreed to be there with you, or who have agreed to like fight for you. Like I guess the thing that's just kind of popping into my mind is the whole thing with, like, I guess the Lord of the Ring, the whole you have my bow and you have my axe. Well,
Yeah,
Usagi has all of her companions who with their different abilities, but even though they've pledged their loyalty to her, she literally gives her life, or is very very protective of them. And I guess that's kind of like you could sort of see that as sort of a mother sort of
yeah. Is it? Do
complex.
you think of it's like a maternal layer that
Yes,
they've added to this hero idea?
absolutely. And also, I also talk about the idea of there's this idea that at the end of the journey, the masculine hero ascends to godhood or ascends to like a higher plane of existence. Whereas in a lot of these narratives, the person is sort of already the goddess herself. She just kind of needs time to realize. It's like Dorothy from the Wizard of Oz. She
Yeah.
had to go through that journey to realize that she had the ability to go home the entire time.
Yes. Yes.
Whereas like with Sailor Moon, she wasn't just the soldier of love and justice. She was also Princess Serenity, and she all had these powers within her. It's and then I I haven't I've read so much of Cardcaptor Sakura, but it's like a lot of it kind of like um you know like there's so much I've forgotten, but you kind of get that idea too. It's like she's not just a person sealing these cards and putting them back in their place. Eventually she becomes the master herself.
Yes.
And that's this idea that you were the goddess all along. You just had to go through this journey in order to realize that. And while there are fight scenes and I know like even the darker ones, it can get pretty crazy. There's also more of an effort not to necessarily subdue your enemy but to also embrace them, or to like use that sort of maternal love and care to help them see the error of their ways, and to like heal them, eventually come to healing themselves.
Yeah, so yeah, kind of. I know Sakura does that on
Hmm.
a more than one occasion, where she reaches out, and she's convincing the cards
Hmm.
to uh, see the error of their ways, maybe, or to work with her instead of against her. And by
Right.
doing that, she can grant them some freedom as opposed to being locked away in a book. And
Right.
I found that, you know, in in a way, you kind of feel stereotypical because the woman wants to talk things through, doesn't she? Where the man just wants to beat it with a stick. So, you know, I really I appreciate that each of these the part of this mythos, the part of these
Hmm.
characters, is that it's as much a personal development.
Hmm.
It's personal emotional development of the character for them, more than the, because, guys, we compartmentalize. We can be like, we're a little bit more like Bruce Campbell from the Evil Dead than, you know than and getting in touch with our feelings as we're fighting the monsters. So yeah.
Yeah, and I discussed that, like, this, it's one thing to transform into their magical girl avatar, but it's not just them transforming, it's like their whole, like, they're not the same person at the beginning that they are at the end.
Yes.
And it's because this entire journey has transformed them, and the experiences that they have to endure, it's not always good either. There are going to be times where they fail, or there are going to be times when they're defeated and they have to go back and regroup. But at the very end of the day, it transforms them not only into this superhero with infinite abilities, but to a more well-rounded, like, just to become a better individual. And you even see that in the OG series, such as Sally the Witch, or Princess Knight, where, Princess Sapphire was already a pretty considerate person because of the position she was in.
Yeah.
But if you read the follow-up or the sequel, the Twin Knights, she accepts her role as being queen of what is it, Goldland or something like that. But when it comes time to teach her daughter to fight and take on the enemies, she's quick to say, "Hey, you know what? I'm also the Princess Knight." So you see that growth throughout her journey, where she's not just this person who happens to look like a guy, but she's also becomes very caring and very, but she's
Well,
also,
we'll,
how
we'll
do
we'll
I?
come back to actually Princess Knight in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to talk about a little bit about the transformation. Something in your paper that I found fascinating is that
Mm-hmm.
the idea of the transformation from the young girl to this other avatar
Mm-hmm.
basically made it acceptable
Mm-hmm.
for the girl to have the powers,
Mm-hmm.
to do the more manly things, do the
Mm-hmm.
fighting, because she wasn't the shojo anymore. She
Right.
was the superhero. And so when she was transformed, it was acceptable for her to fight.
Mm-hmm.
But if she was not transformed, she was expected to be the uh,
Yeah.
the good daughter, the good
Yeah.
student. She was expected to be all those things. But because she could transform, that transformation made her. It made it acceptable that she would be able to take on the
Yeah.
evils of the world.
Yes.
It's just I found that a very fascinating concept. That it's kind of like, I don't know, putting on a mustache and Groucho glasses and
Yeah.
walking around pretending you're a doctor. I mean,
It's
it's
mhm. It's really interesting because in Japan there's this sort of like as I was doing the research, there's definitely a paper trail in that there are these instances where uh if, like, there's, when you say shojo, there's like an immediate idea as to what it is. Like, the term itself was like, as we know, it was originally coined during the Meiji era. And it's this idea, it's not just girl, it's this idea of a girl who's supposed to be, wise and caring, but also defaults to, patriarchy, or just like, very innocent and sweet, but
Yes.
like a withering, like a good sort of image is the idea of the lily, in that they use the lily to represent things that were innocent, and like just anything that encompasses the idea of femininity, and that
Yes, the ideal feminine, chaste, etc.
Meanwhile, there's this idea that if you do anything that steps out of that space of the shoujo, you're kind of in this liminal space where you're not a girl, you're not a guy, but you're kind of, there's an academic and I can't remember the name, but in their paper, they said that there's this liminal space when, like, if there's any sort of transformation from a shoujo to something else, that they're suddenly in this liminal space where they have a mixture of feminine and masculine traits, but they're not one, nor are they the other. There's something in between. A good example of this is the Takarazuka, the ones who are the otokoyaku, or the women who play the male roles,
right?
In that they have that androgynous look that kind of signifies that they aren't women. Like, when they're in the role, they aren't women, they aren't men, but there's something in between. So even though they're like in this avatar and they are coded as male, they are able to do things in that role that as a musumeyaku, or the female roles, they wouldn't be able to do. Because I really hope my supervisor doesn't hear this, because he's gonna excuse me.
Yeah, well, here's an interesting parallel, though. I mean, think about 16th century England and how defined gender roles were. A man who got up on stage and dressed as a woman, playing a romantic role across from another man, was not viewed as homosexual, was not viewed as something that there was something wrong with this person because they dressed and acted like a woman.
Yeah.
Because of the situation they were in, because their role was that of a woman on stage at the Globe Theater.
Yeah.
They were accepted as something else, as an actor, when they were in that role. Now, you could almost even apply that to, we were talking about conventions before we started, and one of the parts I love about the convention space is the acceptance of that space.
Oh yeah.
And that, as I say, if you are a 40-year-old 300-pound man and you want to dress as a magical girl, you can dress as a magical girl and no one will say anything about it, because at the convention, that is your chance, because maybe on the inside you are a magical girl, and that is the only time you get to be who you really feel comfortable being. That's one of my favorite parts of the convention space.
I had that moment where I actually cosplayed one year as Mistress Nine, and I just remember being terrified because up until then I cosplayed as Pokemon. So and then Mistress Nine is a very striking, like, villain character with the long hair and the nails and everything, and I was terrified that I would not be able to do this. But when I put everything on and I had my makeup on and I had the wig on and everything, I looked at myself in the mirror and I was like, I am Mistress Nine. And it was such an amazing feeling to have that. Yeah, and that's exactly, I think, what's going on here. Because if you look at most magical girl series, they are cute. They are in like some of the cutest outfits I've ever seen. Like, if you look at Precure, those outfits are so freaking cute.
Yes.
But those girls will punch you into the universe. Yes, like, they'll punch you into space.
Exactly. Yes.
Like, one of my favorite scenes was from Go Princess Precure, where in the first episode, like, Cure Flora, she's in this beautiful princess frock, and she just takes her fist and goes bam, and you see the enemy just flying in the air, and I'm like, I'm here for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that those outfits are part of, uh, they've become representative of the magical girl genre, period. I mean, you can't be a magical girl and dress in be all drab. Um, but I think that the frilliness of the outfits is almost to balance out the violence of their violence that they're not that is not being the cute little girl. It's you need to dress more cute. Like the cuter your dress, the more violent you can be.
I certainly feel like that's how it is with more recent anime, and this the trend of the dark magical girl. With earlier ones, there's also definitely a sort of thing, like with street fashion at the time, with like the Cole gals.
Yeah.
They're wearing their cute, their girly things, but it's also kind of daring and
Yeah.
sexy, and that's translated to things like Sailor Moon and whatnot. But yeah, there's definitely I feel like now, I mean, I feel like it was long established, because even the very first magical girls in Mahou Sky Sally and Himitsu no Ako-chan, they were very cute, and I feel like even Cutie Honey, which is one of the more, which even though it was released in the 70s, is still one of the most daring magical girl series I have ever seen or read in my life. There's still an element of cuteness to it.
The 70s were a crazy time.
Yeah. 70s magical girl series were a trip.
Yeah.
Shout out to Erin Cerise on YouTube, who does this amazing series called Mahō Profile, which I really like looking at, because that's my jam. So
well, okay, let's as I said, we'll talk about Princess Knight for a minute. And how do you find Princess Knight is a perfect example of the magical girl genre, especially has been picked up as like a torch to bear by the LGBT community. And do you think that has to do with this idea of transformation, of becoming who you truly are? It's a long journey to be for a lot of people to come out. And when they finally come out, it's who they were all along, but it took a very long journey to get there. And that can kind of parallel your sense of, she was the goddess all along.
I think with a lot of magical girl series, they have done something that a lot of people are only just catching up to now, and that they provide representations of characters of different orientations that they would have otherwise not seen before. Yeah. Like for instance, definitely Haruka and Sailor Moon. Just I feel like I've always read, even though she goes by she, her, depending on where you, it depends on where you read it, because it's very different. It's one thing in the manga and it's another thing in the anime. But I've always sort of kind of read her as non-binary, in that you see her in like the male sort of school uniform looking very handsome.
Yes.
But then she looks very beautiful when she's transformed into Sailor Uranus, and they're both her. Like there's like one side, like they're both, like there's not one part of, like it's not one or the other, it's both. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay. Yes.
And it's the same thing with Princess Knight. And the thing about Princess Knight that I very much found fascinating was that there is this, I don't want to say angst, but you definitely see Sapphire trying to negotiate both sides of her personality, because obviously due to the plot, she is seen as a prince, but when she sees her, love interest, she realizes, if I were a princess, it would be so easy to be with him. But she also likes being the prince too.
Yeah.
And I love how much as much as there's so much swashbuckling you see her dealing with this. And I don't think a lot of people, especially when it comes to, like, it's catching up now in the West, but there's so much more to be done. I think these particular series allowed a lot of fans to see something that they really didn't see before on, you know, the media that they're so used to. And when you see that representation on the page, it really helps to negotiate your personality a lot. I don't want to get too much into my origin story, but I will say a lot of Haruka as a person helped me to realize things about myself that I had ideas about, but I don't think I was in a safe space to figure that out for myself. And then once I was in a safe space to figure it out, it helped me realize a lot of things that I uh that I I wanted to think about before, but I didn't think that I had the right to. I didn't think it was safe to.
Okay.
And but but I know especially during the 2000s when Sailor Moon was very popular on Toonami, uh and they finally released Sailor Moon S and Super S, because before it only like went to halfway to R, and then finally like, oh no, we're going to release these episodes, and then they ended up making them cousins, which just made things worse. But I
Yeah.
love the memes. But there's something about seeing that as a person, and I don't want to, like, to see that is helpful, because if you see something or see or experience somebody who is similar to you, it helps with negotiating your own identity. And I don't, and I'm kind of sad that for me the English release of Princess Knight kind of went under the radar, which is fine, because, you know, not everybody recognizes it as a magical girl series. They kind of recognize it as the blueprint to magical girl
Yeah.
series.
Like proto.
Right. But but I think it's really helpful for someone to see their sort of struggle on a medium that they enjoy, that helps them to realize much about what they're going through. And it's also just helpful to see that there are people even out there writing about it, because when you are not in the mainstream,
Yeah.
it's sometimes you just kind of wonder, is there anybody doing that, or is anybody talking about these things? And shoujo manga has always had this history where they have, which is why I really like not just magical girls series, but shoujo or girls comics in general. They've always had this thing where they've talked about it, especially like between like late 50s to like early 80s during the golden age of manga. So I really think it's helpful.
There's, you know, and I know listeners are probably bored of this story at this point, but one of my favorite moments ever has been Otakon a couple of years ago during Charlottesville was going on, where you had the Nazis marching in the streets.
Oh no.
And I was at Otakon at the Sailor Moon photo shoot. The most diverse, beautiful moment ever for me. To contrast the two things of, you had the most diverse group of people all coming together because they loved one thing, and it was beautiful. And I was like, that's the world I'd rather raise a child in. Is this atmosphere of love and understanding than what's going on, a couple hours south of me. So it was, it's Sailor Moon has brought a lot of people together. The story has been embraced by everybody that if they have felt as an outsider. I mean, I know this from a friend of mine in high school. He's passed since, but he loved Sailor Moon, probably got into it just like you did. And it was one of those things where he didn't come out of the closet until years later. but he probably never saw anything that he could identify with growing up in a rural environment like I did, until he saw Sailor Moon, and it became like his totem of, this gave him a sense of empowerment. So yeah, I was it has reached a lot of people in a lot of different ways. And okay, let's shift from this sentimental track. Let's
Okay.
bring ourselves up to date a little bit here. All right, we talked about, touched on some of the deconstructions that have happened recent in the last few years, where they've taken the magical girl genre from the more of the Cardcaptor Sakura style stories to a much darker place. And let me tell you, Boudica episode 3 made me shut off the series for like months before before I got into it again, before I was able to be like, all right, okay, I should finish this. I was like, nope, I wanted to watch cute girls fight monsters in frilly dresses. And then, episode 3 happens and I'm like, nope, I don't need this kind of stress in my life.
I scream. I tell the story. I tell the story every time I do a panel. I saw episode 3 and I literally screamed. My son ran into my room going, "What is wrong with you?" And I went on because I was doing it for research, but man, that hit, I was not expecting that at all. But then I realized who wrote it, and then now I know better.
Yeah, it took a real sharp turn, and you're like, okay. And so was this deconstruction that became popular, this darkening of these series, is it you think it's a more of a reaction, or is it they're like, well, we really don't know where else to go with this genre anymore, because we don't want to make cut and paste of Sakura or cut and paste of Sailor Moon. We want to try and be original and edgy, and so they come up with these darker stories? Or do you think the audience is looking for those stories?
I think it's both. I think what people need to realize about magical girl series is that they are not always sunshine and rainbows. Case in point, I'd like to point out a little 80s series called Magical Princess Minky Momo, which literally featured the main character getting hit by a car and killed in the middle of the series. And the story behind that was that apparently her toys weren't selling all that well, so they decided to get rid of her. But I think the darkness has always been in series. Like Sailor Moon has plenty of darkness. All you need to do is point to season 1, where just about everybody dies. And even Takeuchi Sama herself wanted to kill everybody off and just have one arc, but the Nakayoshi or Shueisha was like, no, that's not happening. Or sorry, was it Kodan? Sorry, it's Kodansha. Like, no, it's not happening. And I think, even though I will not discount Madoka as a brilliant deconstruction, because in many ways it is, there were hints that it was going down that path before it was released, when it was released. In fact, what is it? My Hime, which I believe was released in like the early to mid 2000s, shonen series, is featuring the same thing, where girls are turning into magical girls. And at the very beginning, it just seems like they are doing what they need to do in order to save the world. But and I'm trying to remember this properly. What happens is that they have a wish for somebody they care about, whether it's a family member or like somebody they're in a relationship. And if they fail at something, or if they are unable to do something, because eventually it does become a battle royale, the person they care about dies. And that show predates Madoka by several years. I think Madoka was released in 2010, something along those lines. And then the magical girl lyrical Nanoha also featured very dark themes, like in terms like of child abuse and things along those lines. Even though the girls in that series look super cute, it gets super dark sometimes. But I think the reason why there's so many dark magical girl series now is because Madoka was so popular. And that obviously is credited to the writer of the series, Gen Urobuchi, who has done some pretty dark things. And I was reading an article about an interview that was done when they were asking him why, like, what was the motivation for Madoka? And he said he couldn't understand how these girls, magical girls, had these superpowers and there were like no consequences to having such power. And he wanted to write a series that explored that more. And for what it's worth, Madoka does that very well, in that it shows the cost of what it means to have that much power and how easy it is to be corrupted by that power. Like, I do not want to take away the fact that that series shows that very well. Sayaka's descent haunts me to this day because it could happen to any of us, or just to see her going through that stuff like broke my heart. And then of course, because it was so popular, you have everybody coming out of the woodwork, trying to replicate the success for themselves, which it's the animation, it's bound to happen. I mean, it's happening with isekai right now, right? Yes. Here's the thing though, like, when I look at, like, Madoka has its issues, and the whole idea that these girls, because they have powers, must suffer. I've always had an issue with that. Like, it's one thing to deal with the consequences of having so much power. Like, of course, with great power comes great responsibility. But I feel like that series turns it up to 11.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. It really it becomes it became a stressor for some of us. Yes.
And then you have other series, like one series I saw that was released about a year or so after Madoka, which is Daybreak Illusion. Another series where it's like this magical girl has so much power, but she's given this ability where the people, she discovers that the people that she's fighting are actually humans that have been corrupted by the big bad, and she can hear their thoughts. And she must hear their thoughts as she destroys them, which, puts her into so much
trauma.
Exactly. And it's like, do we really have to go down? Like, okay, I get it. There are consequences to having these powers, but do they really have to suffer that much?
Yeah.
And I think this is the problem that I really have with people who, I mean, if you like dark magical girl series, more power to you. Enjoy it. I've seen some that are done really well. That said, the idea that previous really nice magical girl series didn't show the consequences to having that much power, I'm sorry, it's BS. It really is. I mean, what people have to understand is that many of the old school series, save for Cutie Honey, were released for young girls. So therefore, many of them are power fantasies.
Yes.
When you have these little girls living in a society that expects them to become good wives and mothers, it's not really like that now. But back then, when many of these series were becoming a thing, just the idea that they are destined to become a wife and a mother, and you have this series that shows them an alternative that puts girls at the forefront of their own story. And that's not, is it all sunshine and rainbows? Well, no, but there's this idea that if it's for girls, it must be frilly and pretty. And personally, I like the frilliness and prettiness. Now, for all of Sailor Moon sparkles, when she's transforming, we also see her cry. In Sailor Moon Crystal, we also see her stab herself in the heart after she kills Mamoru, who is under the spell of Queen Beryl. And then in the original anime, just think about how many people she had to see die before she finally takes on Sailor Galactica. And you're telling me that there was nothing that showed the consequences of being the chosen one? Are you serious?
Yeah.
And I'm sure Cardcaptor Sakura had her own issues with it. You've got to get all these cards back that you didn't even mean to release in the first place. There are going to be times when there's going to be stress. I mean, and I think it's just like I don't want to discount any male fans of a series. I do not want to do that. But I do think that a lot of things that gets passed over or forgotten, that these are supposed to be, that many of these older series are feminine power fantasies where they give power to the reader and they're able to live vicariously through this person who is able to do the things that they normally could not. Now, that said, a lot of these dark magical girl series are seinen, or they're made for like young adults or young male adults. So when you're in that sort of genre or in that demographic, there are expectations as to how these sort of series go. So I do understand why they're dark, but at the same time, I do not think I do think it's very sort of, I think it's very misguided to discount these ideas that all these frilly or these like these series that are oriented, that are more geared for girls, are all sunshine and rainbows, because they really aren't. I mean, even Precure, which people are saying are made for younger folks, have those moments. And where the chosen people are like, they take the L, or they're sad, or they're dealing with a lot of stress in their situation. And I get that eventually there's going to be times where things break off and becomes the new thing with magical girl series. Like for Sailor Moon, that's what started the magical warrior parts, and things like Creamy Mommy started the whole like specialist or magical singer or what have you. It revitalizes the genre, which I get, but I also, that said, I don't like the idea that people discount all of these older series as being frilly or like just generally like, I mean, even the Power Rangers, for all our campiness, went through had those moments where they're just going through intense insecurity, or it's not happy-go-lucky all the time, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, there's bound to be some angst because they're teenagers.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Hey, we will definitely have to do this again sometime. We are definitely running over what my typical time limit would be, but this has been great. Let me stay on the line for a minute and let me sum up here. But I'd like to thank you again for coming on and talking magical girls with me. And if you like what you've heard, please subscribe to WLNM, and where we hope to bring you the best that independent creators have to offer. And until next time, keep reading.
This has been a WLNM podcast.